She thought she was safe until the dog refused to let go. Abigail's laughter once filled the small park on the edge of town. That evening, though, her voice never returned home. Police combed the area, neighbors formed search parties, and her family prayed against hope. The hours ticked by with no answers, until a German shepherd named Rex lowered his nose to the ground and pulled against his leash with startling force. Michael Reeves, Rex's handler, had seen that determination before, on the front lines, where trusting his partner meant the difference between life and death. But this wasn't a battlefield, this was home. And still, Rex led him through shadows no one else dared to search. Every step deeper into the woods brought more questions. Why here? Why now? And why did Rex's low growl send shivers down Michael's spine before he even knew what they would find? Sometimes it isn't the sirens or the uniforms that uncover the truth. Sometimes it's the silent resolve of a dog who refuses to give up. The rain had been falling since noon, a thin gray curtain that stitched the sky to the brick shoulders of Roosevelt High. By late afternoon, the building had softened into a hush that felt almost reverent. Hallways lay long and empty, doors closed, bulletin boards bowed with old announcements. Fluorescent lights hummed in tired intervals, some flickering like a thought that could not quite make up its mind. The storm tapped its patient knuckles against the high panes of glass, and the whole place smelled faintly of wet wool, old books, and the disinfectant the janitors trusted more than prayer. Officer Michael Harrington walked those halls with the quiet, practiced stride of a man who had learned how not to startle the world. Late 30s, the weight of the badge worn lower than the metal on his chest. He carried himself like someone who had lived long in rooms where voices rose only when it was too late. He was calm, deliberate, eyes reading the corners as if they were sentences. There was a stillness in him people often mistook for certainty. It wasn't that. It was simply that he had used up the luxury of panic, and what remained was steadiness. Rex padded at his side, 90 pounds of German shepherd shaped by 4 years of work, and the kind of trust you only build by showing up together in every kind of weather. The dog's coat, black along the back and warm tan on the legs, held a fine sheen, even under the damp. His ears flicked, catching the hall's faint scuffs and the rain's small ideas. The leather of his collar creaked when he turned his head. His breath came easy, 2 being double. Man and dog in the long spill of fluorescence, framed by banners from years when victories still mattered more than explanations. Beneath their feet, the waxed floor gave back a soft whisper. Overhead, one of the lights chose that moment to blink in a weary stutter, and Michael felt the smallest ripple run through the dog's muscles. Not fear, just notice. Rex catalogued the world for him. Michael paid attention to the dog. "Easy," Michael said, not because Rex needed it, but because he did. His voice fell into the hush and disappeared. A familiar unease had been walking behind Michael since lunch, just out of sight. The principal had requested a pass-through, the kind of community reassurance patrol that rarely turned into anything. But storms made roofs complain and doors swell in their frames, and old buildings kept secrets. He had seen too many cases begin with small, ordinary sounds, a locker that wouldn't latch, a door that shouldn't be open, a rumor that felt like gossip until it wasn't. Somewhere in him, deep behind the sternum where memory keeps its unswept corners, was the boy from 2 years back, the one he hadn't reached in time. The boy had a bicycle with a bent spoke, and a mother who kept her hair pinned with 2 silver clips. There are failures that soften into lessons. There are others that do not soften at all. He did not carry the boy's name. Carrying the shape of him was enough. They turned down the science wing, then cut toward the center stair, where a poster about the winter play had begun to curl at the edges, damp finding its way even indoors. Rex paused, lifted his nose to the air, and drew in a thought that was not Michael's. The dog's tail set at half-mast. His eyes checked Michael's. A small, silent question. "We're good?" Michael's hand answered with that easy touch again, 2 fingers, a quiet blessing. "We're good." They passed a row of lockers with dented doors and stickers that had managed to outlive their slogans. Somewhere a clock ticked with the stubbornness of old machines. Rain drummed its fingers harder against the block glass windows that had never bothered to be beautiful. The building exhaled and settled, as if listening to them pass. "Stairs or West Hall?" Michael asked, not expecting a reply and getting one anyway. Rex angled left, West Hall, and Michael yielded without thinking. That was how it worked. The dog carried the nose and the instincts. The man carried the authority to make a door open. Between them, something like grace moved. A custodian's cart had been parked at an angle near the library doors, mop standing upright like a flag at half-staff. A damp track shone away from it, and a yellow sign warned of what tired feet already knew. Michael paused and listened. Above the rain and the lights, into the art and music corridor. The dog glanced at Michael once more, then lowered his head and breathed in slow, as if the very air held print he could read. 4 years, and the ritual had become liturgy. Rex would mark the world with scents, weight them, decide what mattered. Michael would hold the leash with the loosest of hands, as if refusing to interrupt a prayer. What existed between them was not command so much as conversation, and the pauses meant as much as the words. They moved on. Michael's radio muttered once, dispatch checking a traffic complaint 2 miles off, and then went quiet again. He thought of the promise he'd made to himself at the start of the year. More walks, less bourbon. 1 call to his sister every Sunday. Be the kind of partner Rex already believed he was. He found that last one both humbling and protective. Dogs guard the truth of us. They do not keep our secrets. They keep our souls from straying too far. Another light flickered. The hallway here narrowed, as if the building's architect had been forced to bargain with space and made his concession on the backs of children who would one day shoulder it gladly. Student work lined the walls, watercolors that bled into tender blues, charcoal portraits with eyes too wise for their frames. A paper sun hung slightly crooked above a row of music recital flyers. Somewhere along the corridor, a draft moved, bringing with it the metallic whisper of the art room's sink fixtures. Water and metal, old pipes and patience. The rain outside stitched its steady line, and the building held. "Routine," Michael said softly. Not quite to Rex, and not quite to himself. There was comfort in that word. Routine is how you keep your hands from shaking when you remember the things you cannot fix. You do the next right step. You check the locks. You walk the halls. You listen. Rex's paw falls hushed. He slowed, ears rising as if drawn by invisible thread. One ear tipped forward, then the other, catching an intention the human ear had not yet been invited to hear. The dog's head tilted a fraction, and the muscles in his shoulders grew very still. Michael felt it before he understood it, the way you feel a front moving in before the leaves turn their pale undersides to the wind. The leash grew weightless in his hand. He stopped. For a breath, nothing in the world moved. The old fluorescent above them buzzed a fine silver note. The rain gave the glass its soft percussion. Somewhere far off a door sighed back into its frame after a slow rebound. Michael watched Rex's face. The dog's eyes sharpened. He drew in air again, softer than a sigh, and let it rest on his tongue the way some creatures taste a storm. A flick of Rex's gaze touched the right-hand wall, then the stretch of corridor ahead, the direction of the art rooms. "All right," Michael said. He did not hurry the word. He did not need to. He laid his palm on the ruff at Rex's neck, felt the warm coil of strength there, the living insistence. The touch was not command, it was agreement. They turned together. They passed the music room with its closed piano lid and the faint ghost of varnish and brass. The art corridor opened like a longer breath, darker somehow, though the same tired lights tried their best. The windows here took the rain like an apology and offered nothing in return. At the far end, a red exit sign glowed its perpetual sermon. Rex's pace shortened, padding steps, measuring distance in thought rather than tiles. The leash drew a gentle diagonal toward the right side of the hall. Michael saw the way his partner's body gathered, not tense yet, just attentive, like a poem saving its last line. He could feel the old ache arrive under his ribs, the one that said, "Be ready, be better than last time." It was not fear. Fear rattles. This was the steadying hand on the tiller as the river narrowed. Another habit returned, the small calloused scrape of his thumb along the leash's leather, as if reading Braille he had memorized long ago. 4 years of chasing the same edge, the same half-second where choice lives. He looked down and caught Rex looking up, the fast flick of regard that moved between them like a secret. A touch of nose to knuckle, a brightness in the dog's eye that said, "We're here, we're both here." They reached the bend where the wall kinks slightly, construction from another decade, leaving behind a permanent shrug. The art classroom door stood 30 feet ahead, painted a color that had been cheerful once, and now only remembered how. A paper crane dangled from a length of fishing line taped to the lintel. It swung a little in the draft, a small white heartbeat. Rex's ears pricked to full attention. Michael felt the very fine hairs at the back of his neck rise, not from anything heard, but from the dog's stillness. The world seemed to hold itself in place. The building listened, and so did they. On the far pane, rain paused, gathered, slid. Michael's breath went quiet. Rex's ear twitched toward the art room door, as if a note too soft for the human world had rung. And in that hush, just before the sound would shape itself into something clear, man and dog stood together, one steady hand resting on a warm, bristled neck, both of them leaning into the same waiting silence. For a suspended instant, the hallway was all breath and listening, the rain flattening itself against the glass. The fluorescent dog's body had a language both exact and spare. Rex's tail lowered to a measured line. His mouth closed. The soft, open warmth of a companion turned, by degrees, into the narrow beam of a tool. "Easy," Michael said, quiet, not to blunt him, but to acknowledge the edge. His hand found the place at the base of Rex's neck where the fur grew dense and warm. The touch wasn't command so much as witness. "I'm here. I'm with you." The paper crane above the door made a tiny arc, as if agreeing to some small gravity. Rex took one step forward, then planted. Michael let the leash slide an inch, then held. The corridor around them pinched down to a long, patient tunnel. Somewhere far away, a locker expanded with the weather and clicked to itself. The building made its old, tired music. Rex's nose lifted, nostrils worrying the air, as though taste and memory had met there. A crease formed between his eyes. The moment held. And then he barked. It wasn't the perfunctory announcement he used to let a passerby know he had been seen. It wasn't the disciplined, two-note alert that meant drugs or powder where powder shouldn't be. This sound began low, a subterranean shudder, and climbed in a clean, hard line to something bright enough to cut. It rang against the lockers and slid under the door like a blade looking for a seam. It startled the exit sign into seeming a different shade of red. "Rex," Michael warned gently, though his voice had gone smaller in his own ears. He shifted his weight so his hip set between the dog and the door, a habit as old as the badge. "You face what comes. I'll hold the center." Rex barked again, sharper. Insistence turned into argument, and lunged, that short, tight lunge of a dog who would break a wall with his chest if you let him. The leash sang once between them, leather on metal. Michael set his feet, held the line. "Hey, hey," he breathed. The syllables meant as a hand on a shoulder in a crowded room. "Easy, partner." The dog's body hummed. He pawed at the base of the door with a sudden, furious precision, nails ticking on wood. 1, 2, 1, 2. Like a code tapped from the far side of a thin partition. The sound snapped at Michael's nerves, a quick, bright pain that lit up the long, unlit hallway of memory behind his eyes. The boy with the bicycle moved there, dark as a smudge. A name he never said out loud, turned over like a coin in a pocket. He swallowed once and made his breath slow. "Talk to me," he said to the dog, absurd and not absurd at all. Rex glanced up, an eye, a breath, and then went back to the scene. Slip through. Damp plaster, metal finding its tongue in cold weather, a sour note under it that didn't belong to the hallway. He leaned, almost without thinking, and set his ear just off the wood, never touching, never giving up the advantage of space. He closed one eye and let the other soften, the way you do when you're trying to hear past the shape of your own skull. For a breath, there was only the rain's patient metronome and the fluorescence-high insect whine. Then, so faint he might have tried to name it wind, there was a thud. Not a book sliding from a desk, not a chair settling. This was singular and soft-edged, like something that had been moving, gave up and met the floor with the gentleness of exhaustion. Michael's spine went colder by a degree. He kept his expression placid, the face you put on for witnesses and small children, and let his free hand hover near the handle without touching it. Rex's bark dropped to a growl you could have mistaken for the throat of an engine if you didn't know where to listen. He shifted his paws and scratched again, frantic now, urgency fraying the edge of training. The sound knifed at the base of the door, a small violence that said, "Let me be what I am." "Rex, heel." The word came out more quickly than he meant. Muscle memory snapped the dog half a step back, but the growl continued, the leash vibrating with the tremor of it. Michael worked the dog a breath farther off the line, enough room to move if the door opened inward, enough space to see the first thing that might come through. He wanted backup. He wanted to be wrong. He wanted to be the man who pulled the boy from the dark room 2 years ago, and not the one who arrived with apologies stitched under his tongue. Another sound, smaller than the first, scraped along the hinge-side frame. A scratch, or the memory of one, like fingernails remarking wood. It was the kind of noise you could walk past all your life and never hear, except once. It lived in a frequency dogs understood, as if they'd invented it themselves. Rex's ears pressed forward so hard the skin at their base wrinkled. He stood on his toes. A thin, high whine slipped from him and held, a wire drawn between heart and door. Michael felt the note inside his chest cavity, an ache in the cartilage. He reset his breathing, counted himself through a small cadence to keep his hands gentle. The left one lay light on the leash, the right hovered like a promise near the holster, near the radio, near every choice he could live with. He glanced down the corridor, left, then right, reading the long planes of linoleum for movement. The school had a way of sending small things across the floor when no one was looking. Dust mice, forgotten notes, the corner of a poster set loose from tape by humidity. Nothing moved now but and distant, like a voice from the wrong end of a dream. He cleared his throat, tried again. Not the script, just the man. "Hello, it's the police." Silence took the sentence and put it aside. He pressed his palm very lightly to the door, not to open it, but to feel the world on the other side. The wood gave back nothing he could interpret. He could see, as if overlaid on the painted surface, the map of the room beyond. Sinks along the left wall, windows high and mean with the light, cabinets in the back crammed with jars that wore the ghosts of children's colors. A room built for making things that dry slowly. Rex's growl made a ladder into the seconds. He stepped that ladder, rung by rung, and somewhere after the 7th he heard it. Not a thud, not a scratch, but a sob. Small, broken, the sound a throat makes when the body is done negotiating with air. The back of Michael's neck went to ice. The boy with the bicycle stepped forward, then mercifully stood back, replaced by something with a steadier hand. Michael did not move for 2 heartbeats, and in that stillness he thought a whole conversation no one would ever hear. "I am here. I am sorry for the world. I am not going to leave." Rex glanced up, and what passed between them was not mystical. It was made of years. It said, "Now." Michael let the leash shorten, felt the dog's shoulder against his knee. A living hinge. He shifted to give himself room, and tested the handle with the back of his fingers. Locked. Of course. The simplest and ugliest word in buildings like this. "Okay," he murmured, a syllable meant for both of them. His mouth had gone dry. He drew in air and tasted metal. He eased his right hand down to the radio clipped at his chest, but didn't lift it yet. There is a cost to asking for help. Part of it is time, and time has teeth. Behind the door, the world shifted in a way he could not see. He heard it as a change in the quiet, the way a room's temperature drops when a gown opens, and a doctor looks at the thing no one wants to name. Another faint scratch, then the ragged catch of breath that hadn't learned how to be steady again. Rex leaned and whined, loud in the small corridor, the sound fraying into something like a plea. The dog's tail had gone still. His whole body asked the same question, over and over. Michael touched him, 2 fingers, the sacrament of their work, and he felt, under that touch, the fierce, mortal animal that would go through fire if he asked. He angled his body, planting the outside foot, and tested. Almost believed he had invented it. Came a breath-shaped yes, not the word, but the surrender beneath it. Michael closed his eyes for the briefest blink, not in prayer exactly, but in acknowledgement. He opened them to the long, wet, humming corridor, the exit sign insisting on escape, the paper crane turning slowly on its line, his partner holding himself like an arrow on a drawn bow. "Okay," he said again to the door, to the small voice, to the animal who knew before he did. He set his palm flat against the paint, felt the cool there, and drew his hand away. The radio waited under his thumb. The handle waited under his palm. The sound on the far side of the door gathered itself like a wounded bird, and in the hushed light of the art corridor, with the rain pressing its steady song into the glass, Michael Harrington felt the chill of doubt slide down the length of his spine and turn finally into decision. The moment stretched just long enough to make a coward of caution. Michael's thumb found the radio's ridged button. "Dispatch, Unit 12 at Roosevelt High," he said, voice kept small and even against the door. "Art corridor, room 219. Locked door. Possible subject inside. Audible distress. Requesting backup and EMS. Preparing to breach." Static gathered itself and answered. "Copy 12. Units en route. ETA 6 minutes. Use caution." 6 minutes. In the tight coil of Rex's body, in the way the dog's whine thinned to a wire, 6 minutes felt like distance measured in miles. Michael imagined the sound behind the door shrinking back, learning again how not to hope. He pressed his palm flat to the paint one last time and felt nothing but cool. "We're not waiting," he told the dog, which was the same as telling himself. He stepped to the latch side and set his shoulder into the wood, testing, not charging. The frame gave him the first truth of old buildings on wet days. Swollen grain, tired screws, a strike plate that had outlived 3 principals and the football glory years. He rocked back, set his feet, and blew out a breath he didn't know he'd been hoarding. The hallway hung on the fluorescent's faint stutter. The paper crane spun a little to watch. "Police," he said once more to the seam. "Back away from the door if you can." Rex held like an arrow knocked to string. Michael kicked low and close to the lock, the way a carpenter had once taught him in a different life. The impact cracked down his shin and climbed into his hip. The door shuddered and found its stubbornness. The second kick split something he couldn't see. Wood hallway light pour into the room first. A pale spill across tables and stools, and the long sinks left with someone's unfinished clay. The air lifted to meet them. Damp plaster, old paint, the faint, wrong sweetness of something that had learned to live without sunlight. He kept one hand on the leash and the other on the flashlight. Beam low and patient, sweeping corners, remembering the map he'd carried 1,000 steps to get here. Sinks left, windows high, cabinets at the back like wardrobes that kept children's messes from scaring the tidy-minded. "Police," he said again into the room, not loud, just present. "We're coming in." "Stay," he told Rex, and felt the dog's obedience as a pause, not a retreat. A beat to let the world show itself. They stepped across the threshold together, man a half step ahead, dog already reading news his partner couldn't. The light skated across a scatter of brushes like small bones. A row of drying racks with papers still clipped like flags. A half-finished self-portrait whose eyes looked at the floor as if it had secrets. At the far wall, beneath a bank of high windows dimmed by rain, stood a heavy storage cabinet, splotched with fingerprints of color from years of small hands. Chalky sky blues, a smear of ochre, a thumb of permanent black. It had been shoved tight against the baseboard, hard enough to flatten the dust into a tidal line. Rex didn't need to be told. The second Michael's beam found that cabinet, the dog broke from the hold with a single, clean arrow of motion. No panic, just purpose cut to the bone. He reached it and went bent-ankled in the way that meant urgency strained against training. claws ticking at the base like someone knocking on a trapped heart. "Rex," Michael called softly, but there was no rebuke in it. The dog's paw raked, then again, shedding white paint flecks that clung to the black nails like frost. A low, insistent bark leaned into the wood. Michael's light found the evidence his hands already knew to look for, the dust line disturbed where the cabinet had traveled recently. The faint crescent scrapes on the floor where feet had levered the weight, two bright screw heads on the cabinet's back that looked newer than the rest. As if someone had thought about anchoring it, and then decided gravity and secrecy were enough. He crouched, gloved fingers running along the baseboard where it met the floor. There, just left of center, the slightest gap, a line the color of old bread crust, thin as a lie. The beam found it, and the world sharpened around a single idea. He set his shoulder to the cabinet's edge and pushed. The thing was a brute, solid, heavy with years of dried clay and tempera, the sort of institutional furnace pace, digging his paws at the seam in the floor, the nails making that code again. Here, here, here. Michael repositioned, braced his feet and shoved. The cabinet slid a handspan, then another, leaving a clean arc in the dust like a moon drawn on a blackboard. The smell changed as the wall behind it exhaled, a deeper damp with a metallic edge running under it like wire. The beam found the truth, a rectangle cut into the old floorboards, edges darkened by hands and time, iron hinges sunk deep, a recessed ring that should have lifted easy and did not, because someone had thought to bind it with a length of wire twisted flat. The ring itself was cool beneath his glove. Michael unhooked the twist with steady fingers, fighting the old instinct to hurry, because urgency wastes strength, and strength is what lifts a thing that does not want lifting. "Dispatch," he said into the radio without taking his eyes off the floor. "Unit 12. Gaining access to a concealed subfloor compartment in room 219. Audible signs of distress previously confirmed. Proceeding. Copy. 12 additional units, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. A whole childhood, and a whole life could be measured in less. "Back," he told Rex, and the dog gave him a half-step, eyes locked to the ring as if he could muscle it open by looking. Michael slid his fingers under the metal and felt the old wood try to keep its secret. He pulled. The hinges answered with a long, pained creak, a voice used only for confessions. Cold air rose, cellar cool, earth damp, carrying the breath of old dust and something sharper underneath that caught at the soft lining of the nose. His light leaned into the opening and fell down a short wooden throat. Narrow steps dropping into a dark that wasn't simply the absence of light, but the presence of a place that had not meant to be seen. Rex's front paws found the threshold and he planted there, ears thrust forward, body trembling at a pitch Michael could feel through the floorboards. From below the sound returned, stripped and thin, a scrape that might have been fingers or something trying to become fingers again. And beneath it a soft, broken sound that found its way straight into the gristle between bone and memory. Michael swallowed. In the gathering chill, he could feel the building's long history pressing close, the daily mess of children's lives, the way joy leaves scuff marks on floors and grief leaves them on people. But this, he knew in that private place where truth arrives before language, was not the casual cruelty of a single bad actor. Cabinets anchored to hide seams, dust lines telling of recent weight, wire twisted flat over a ring. This was preparedness, not panic, a design. He stood very still with the flashlight aimed down, as if the beam could carry comfort like warmth. "Police," he said, softer now, letting the words drop like coins down his weight, and made a noise that wasn't quite a bark, more like a promise he didn't know how to put into letters. Michael rested 2 fingers on the dog's withers, the ritual again, grounding both of them against the stare of what came next. Rain wrote its steady cursive on the high windows. The fluorescent hummed its pale hymn. Somewhere a clock made a sound like forgiveness trying to keep time. He saw, suddenly and with unwelcome clarity, the way stories take root in a town. A girl's name on a flyer at the grocery store. A mother learning the trick of speaking without speaking. The brave faces people make for each other so they don't have to watch themselves break. And underneath those stories, sometimes, systems, the kind that prefer basements to sunlight, cabinets to questions. He straightened. The trapdoor gaped like an unslept night. He could feel the old failure stirring, its hand at his elbow asking if he remembered how heavy regret could be. He did. He set his jaw gently against it. "Dispatch," he said, the calm back in his voice, because calm makes room for courage. "Unit 12 descending. Advise incoming units concealed basement access at rear of ART 219. Copy." He clipped the radio back and looked at Rex. The dog's eyes held the dark as if to keep it from spilling. "With me," Michael said, and it wasn't a command this time, so much as an invitation. On the threshold of the opening, with cold air washing their faces and the deeper hush gathering at their feet, Michael Harrington understood what his bones had been telling him since the first bark. This was not just a missing child found by luck and loyalty. It smelled of plans and signatures. It had the polish of hands that did the wrong thing often enough to make it tidy. The trapdoor waited. The dark below breathed like a thing that had learned patience. Michael set his foot on the first step, and the old wood answered like it had been expecting him. The first step answered Michael with a tired complaint, a creak that rose from the wood like a memory and settled somewhere behind his heart. Cold air breathed up from the opening, the sort that lives in places left to themselves too long. It smelled faintly of wet plaster and iron, as if the room below had swallowed a handful of nails and learned to live with the taste. Dust lifted in a fragile bloom and drifted through the cone of his flashlight, each mote turning once before it disappeared. "Easy," he told Rex, though the word was more for him than the dog. He shortened the leash until leather touched his palm just enough to be felt, not enough to bind. 4 years together had taught them where to stand. Rex a half-length ahead, Michael offset so he could cover the angle. The ritual steadied him, like reciting an old prayer, not because you believed in the words, but because the cadence knew how to carry you, without crouching. Every muscle in alert conversation with the next. Cobwebs banded the stairwell like abandoned sheet music. Strands brushed the dog's ears and stuck to the coarse guard hairs along his shoulders. He shook once, a small ripple that ran from ruff to tail and finished in the quiet click of his teeth. Then he moved again, choosing each stair as if it had been laid just for him. The air grew colder, thin, and metallic, the way hospital wards sometimes do in the hour before dawn. Michael tasted it on the back of his tongue and felt his jaw tighten. He hated bringing Rex into rooms like this. The dog knew danger without understanding malice. He would go wherever Michael asked because that was the shape of their promise. Loyalty is a clean word, but it costs. Michael had learned to pay that price out of his own purse. Asking another creature to pay it with him, that was the weight. A third stair groaned. The flashlight licked down walls close enough to touch, old brick, flaking paint, a seam where someone had cut and patched without care for beauty. Pipes ran along the ceiling in stiff arthritic lines, sweating in places, ticking softly as the day's heat lost its argument with the ground. There were initials scratched into one riser, 2 crooked letters with a heart around them, years old by the look of the dust packed in their cuts. He wondered who had snuck down here for a dare, and whether they had come alone. Rex brought his head up, nostrils flexing. A low rumble gathered in his chest and faded, not warning so much as note-taking. Michael laid 2 fingers on the dog's withers, a touch that said, "I see what you see, I'll carry the part you can't." The warmth under his hand steadied him more than the rail ever could. He thought about the boy with the bent bicycle and the 2 silver hair clips. Grief is a staircase you descend over and over, and it never takes you to the same place twice. He had promised himself, quietly, with the kind of promise you make between a man and his own soul, that the next child would not meet his voice through a closed door. 2 more, he murmured. The words made a small cloud in the cold. They reached the landing, a sliver of floor that widened the corridor by a breath before narrowing again. The cobwebs here knitted themselves into silky curtains that caught the light and wore it like a shawl. Michael swept the beam through them, the web trembling but holding, patient as old women with secrets. A broken pencil lay on the concrete, bitten halfway through. The ferrule bent like it had tried to cry out and been stepped on instead. Small things tug at a man's heart more than large ones. He thought of Abigail Ross and the way a name feels different in the mouth when its owner is 12. Rex nosed the pencil, dismissed it, and looked down the of the next tread, met them in the center of the body, as if wood and bone were speaking in the same dialect. Beneath that, something else, a thin drip, patient and stubborn, counting time into a basin unseen. "Dispatch," Michael said, keeping his voice low. "Unit 12, continuing descent, no visual yet on subject. Air is cold, metallic, structure seems old." The last word felt insufficient, and exactly right. "Copy 12, units 1 minute out. 1 minute can be a mercy or a meanness." He put the radio away. Rex took the next stair and the next, his body now a single line drawn toward whatever truth waited in the dark. Michael followed with a steadiness that was not courage so much as refusal to leave. The beam found a spider in the crook of a pipe, legs tucked, patient as a priest. The small patient lives of small patient things. He tried to let that calm him, and could not quite. He should have waited. It would have been smarter, safer, the kind of thing policy loves: more bodies, more light, fewer chances for any one bad moment to write its ugly sentence across a life. But fear teaches men to delay. Love moves first. He looked at the dog and admitted the truth. He was selfish. He wanted to be the first face the child saw that was not cruel. He reached the bottom. The floor was concrete, cold soaking through the rubber of his soles. The ceiling lowered into pipes and long-nailed wood that had learned how not to fall. On his left, stacked crates with their lids half-pried, labels torn down to white scars. On his right, a wall lined with insulation that had slumped in its bats like tired shoulders. The flashlight's circle swam across them and came to rest on a crude partition, boards hammered into place, the seams stuffed with rags and tape, as if sound itself could be taught where to stop. Rex went still. The only motion in him was breath and the tremble in the muscles along his haunch. He turned his head, just enough to place his eye on Michael. The look that had always felt to the officer like a question and a vow braided together. "I know," Michael said. The words were small, careful things, and he kept them that way so they would not break. The metallic tang was stronger here, close as a hand. He could feel it settle on his teeth. His mind did what minds do and offered him pictures he didn't want, rust and blood and the slow chemistry of despair. He shook them off gently, the way you brush leaves from a good coat. The job is to see what's there, not what the dark suggests. He cast the light along the partition. A corner had begun to peel where the humidity had lifted the tape. Tiny scratches scored the lower board, not in straight lines, but clustered, frantic. He crouched and touched them with his glove. The marks were shallow, but many, the way a day becomes a history when you put them end to end. Rex shifted, nostrils telling him whatever they tell a creature built for the world's hidden map. A noise came then, almost humiliated to be noticed. The wet stop-start of someone trying to calm their own breathing. The dog's ears flicked a fraction higher. Michael felt the old, steadying mechanism inside him settle, click, 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 as if he were fitting himself into something lined with velvet and steel. He took a single step forward and put his palm on Rex's shoulder, 2 fingers pressing gently into living heat. He had brought this animal down a throat of dark because he trusted him, and because he had no business asking another man to carry what he himself would not. That was the whole of it. He would carry the danger with Rex, not behind him. "I'm here," he said, not sure whether he meant it for the child, the dog, or himself. The stairs behind them creaked again. Just the settling of wood, he told himself. But he turned his head to mark the line of retreat anyway. He pictured the route back up in reverse. Broken pencil, web curtain, the initials cut into the riser, the breath of iron. If the world decided to run against them, he needed that map already drawn. Rex leaned toward the partition, a low sound in his chest, softening into something almost conversational. "Let me in. Let me see." Michael slid the beam along the seam and found the head of a nail, proud by a fingernail's width. He could work that loose with the crowbar he'd spotted upstairs, or with the one Luck had left leaning by the wall here. A tool forgotten or planted, he couldn't tell. "Hold," he whispered to Rex, and the dog did, though the command pulled at him like a tide. Michael reached for the crowbar, its iron chill like a truth in his palm. He set the bite beneath the head of the lowest nail and lifted. The board gave a reluctant groan, the kind you hear from an old man when he remembers young pain. He paused, not because he doubted, but because he could feel the shape of the room beginning to change, as if the dark itself had leaned toward them to listen. The flashlight trembled once, then steadied as he tightened his wrist. "Almost," he said, and there was a tremor in it he could not hide. The rain above them kept up its soft work on the world. Somewhere upstairs, in a different life, a bell would ring and a hallway would fill with voices. Down here, the cold held them like a thought. Rex's breath touched his wrist. The crowbar waited in his hand like a verdict. Michael Harrington closed his fingers, feeling the metal press back, a small pain that made the present bright, and he understood, as clearly as a man can in a place like this, that descending is not just going downstairs, it is choosing a side. He had chosen. The stairwell swallowed sound as they went. Michael first, Rex a close shadow, the flashlight's beam a narrow ribbon across bricks that had sweated out 100 winters. Each step answered with a tired creak, old wood speaking in a voice that had learned to keep kind of cold that feels like it has hands. At the bottom, the light fell across a low room, no larger than a storage shed. Crumbling brick, twisted pipes, a floor pieced together from rough planks and poured concrete that had spidered with hairline cracks. Dust lifted with their breathing and hung there, a gray constellation. Rex eased ahead and stopped with one paw hovering, ears pitched hard toward the far corner. Michael followed the line of the dog's body and saw it, a partition of boards, nailed in haphazard rows, edges uneven, wood too new for a place this old. Someone had built a wall inside a room that didn't need one. Beyond it, something moved with the careful, hopeless energy of a trapped bird. Michael swallowed against the taste of rust. "Police," he said quietly, the sound careful not to break anything that had already been broken. "If you can hear me, I need you to stay still. We're going to get you." A breath answered, a small ragged pull of air, and then a sound that gripped the room by the spine. Sobbing. Not loud, not theatrical, just the body's last honest language. Rex's tail went still. He took a half step, then sat on his haunches, as if remembering every lesson he'd ever learned about being big near something smaller than fear. He turned his head slightly to the side, softening his profile, making himself the least frightening version of himself. The dog had a way of creating space without moving. Michael felt, as he always did, the modest awe of it. He scanned the floor for tools and found a length of bent rebar and an old crowbar mottled with paint. He tested the boards with a knuckle, listened to the tone, then slid the iron under a nail head and leaned slow. The first nail protested, then came free with a dry, reluctant sigh. Dust coughed out of the seam and blew back at him. He turned his face away, blinked grit from his eyes, and kept going. One board, another. Cold sweat ran down from his hairline and gathered at his jaw. The flashlight lay on a box to his left, beam aimed low along the floor, so light wouldn't stab wherever eyes might be hiding. "Almost there," he said, not sure if he was speaking to himself, to Rex, or to the small hurt sound behind the wood. The third board split under the crowbar with a crack that felt too loud for the size of the room. Dust rose in a choking bloom. Rex sneezed once, a small apologetic sound, and then held as if bracing the air. Michael coughed into the crook of his elbow, tasted the building's years, and pried at the last strip of wood. The nail came, then stuck, then came again with a rusty shriek. He pulled the board aside and set it down gently, like something that might wake. A thin rectangle opened. The flashlight's spill found a shape in the shadows, as small as survival requires. Michael knelt and lowered the light until it warmed the floor and not her eyes. "My name is Michael," he said, voice low and steady. "This is my partner, Rex. We're here to help. No one's going to hurt you." For a second, nothing changed. Then the smallest shift, chin lifting a breath's height, hair parting, one eye peering out. Watery blue ringed with red, pupils blown wide to drink any mercy the light would give. A face ghosted with dirt and the pale map of hunger, cheeks hollowed, lips cracked to the soft white of worry. She flinched from the brightness, so he angled it farther down, aiming to illuminate his hands instead of hers. Hands open, palms out, fingers loose. He remembered training that had nothing to do with police work, what a therapist once taught him about not crowding a frightened thing. Rex waited for permission he already had. Michael touched the dog's ruff. "Slow," he murmured. The shepherd stood and moved with the careful geometry that makes a large animal look smaller. Head lowered, spine easy, steps placed like words chosen with care. He didn't look at the girl directly. He looked near her. He breathed near her. An inch at a time until she could smell him. Sun on fur, leather, the clean, warm scent of a creature that belongs to the day. The girl's shoulders trembled. She uncoiled without rising, a paper crane unfolding one hesitant crease. Her hands came away from her legs, thin, dirty crescents under the nails. Michael saw a faint bracelet of bruising around one wrist and felt heat flare under his collarbone. The old anger that never knew where to go in a room like this. He pressed it down. There would be time for anger when she had a blanket around her shoulders. Rex took one more step and stopped within reach. He lowered his chest to the floor, chin against his paws, and exhaled. The sound was barely there, a little ribbon of air, but it changed the room. The girl's sob hitched. She looked at him full on now, and for a fleeting second, the child she had been showed up. Just a flash at the rim of her eyes, like light behind a thin curtain. Her hand moved. Shaking, she set it on the side of his neck. Fur met skin. Something in her collapsed inward in a way that was not defeat. It was surrender of a different kind. a letting go of holding on alone. She leaned into him with the whole of her small body and hid her face in his coat. The sound she made then was not the sound of strength. "What's your name?" he asked, only when her breathing stopped trying to trip her. There was a long pause in which dust settled and the room learned a new balance. "Abigail," she whispered into Rex's fur, voice raw and thin, the syllables almost lost in him. "How old are you, Abigail?" 12. Michael closed his eyes for just a second, a private acknowledgement. The name from the flyer, the age under the smiling photo taped to storefront windows. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't tell her he knew who she was. He let her be a girl in a room with a dog and a man who would not leave. Rex shifted only enough to give her more of himself. His tail moved once, one slow sweep on the dusty floor, and then stilled again, a metronome deciding for both of them how the next moments should pass. "Abigail," Michael said, "we're going to get you out of here, I promise." Her grip tightened in Rex's coat. For a heartbeat, she didn't speak. Then the words came, scraped raw from some place that shouldn't exist in a child. "They said—" She stopped and swallowed. The sound of it was so small that Michael had to lean closer to hear. "They said no one would ever find me." The sentence hung in the air between the three of them, like a thread drawn taut. Michael felt it catch on the hooks inside him, the ones where memory hangs its coats. He wanted to tell her that people say all kinds of things when they need to believe the world is theirs to arrange. He wanted to tell her about the rain, and how it has a way of finding every crack, no matter how carefully you paint over it. Instead, he said, they were wrong, and left it there, because the truth should be simple when you're cold and afraid. He checked the perimeter without standing fully, scanning corners with the flashlight's low beam. There was a thin mattress rolled tight, and a plastic water jug half empty. No personal things, no color. A life stripped to function. He felt his jaw tense until it ached. He made his face gentle before he looked back. "Abigail," he said, "I'm going to call some people who will help us get you warm and checked by a doctor. I'll stay with you. Rex will stay too." Her nod was so small it might have been a tremor. He touched his radio but didn't press the button yet, not until she'd had one more minute to breathe without strangers' voices in the room. Rex lifted his head an inch and pressed his muzzle, lay on the box, pooling light along the floor like rain that had found a way inside. He studied the crude frame where he had pulled the boards, and the clean scuff marks on the floor, the smear of fresh nail heads in old wood. The room had the feel of habit, not panic, a place used more than once, prepared with the efficiency of people who had learned all the wrong lessons. Behind him, Abigail breathed out, a longer breath this time, the kind the body takes when it starts to believe the next one will be allowed. Michael pressed the radio and kept his voice level for her sake. "Dispatch, Unit 12, confirmed juvenile located, conscious and breathing. Female, approximately 12. Request EMS to basement level. beneath Art 219. Advise responders. Concealed access through floor hatch. Scene secure for now. Copy. 12. The radio crackled. EMS and additional units en route. He let go of the button and listened to the building's old heart beat along with theirs. Rex shifted once more and settled. Abigail's hand, thin, smudged, rested in a thick fur at his chest like an anchor. Michael didn't look at the rebar or the boards or the dark corners. Not yet. He looked at the dog and the girl and the jacket that made her small shoulders look smaller, and he let the simplest thought take root where the tougher ones would later have to grow. Found. For a long second after the radio crackled its affirmation, the room seemed to hold its breath with them. The boards Michael had pried free lay in a broken stack like loose ribs. Dust drifted and settled. Abigail's small, shuddering form stayed folded into Rex, as if the dog were the only solid ground left in the world. Michael drew the jacket a little tighter around her shoulders, tucking the collar beneath her chin. The fabric had kept his weather all day. Now it borrowed hers. Salt, fear, the cold of rooms without sun. "Help is on the way," he said. He kept his voice as level as a hand on still water. Rex lifted his head enough to breathe in her hair and let it out warm against her temple. The gesture softened something in the air. Above them, a door banged, and the building remembered it had a pulse. The sirens had been distant before, threads of sound combed by rain. Now they came as a tide, gathering at the far end of the hall, thinning to footsteps. Radio check flicked a glance at Rex and measured the dog in a heartbeat. People who'd lived a while around pain learned to recognize the shape of kindness, even when it had teeth. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, voice pitched low and ordinary, as a kitchen morning. "I'm Carla. We're going to get you warm." She knelt without crowding, opening a silvered blanket that unfolded with a metallic sigh, like rain sliding off a roof. The younger medic, Evan, set a small kit down, his movements neat, almost reverent. Abigail didn't let go of Rex. She pressed her face closer into his ruff, as if the world might not see her if she stayed tucked into the place where his heartbeat lived. Rex didn't move. He had made himself into a shore. "Let her keep him," Michael said softly, more to the room than to anyone in it. Carla nodded once. "If he's staying, he's staying." She eased the blanket around the girl, tucking edges the way you do when you've learned what to do with shaking you can't stop. Her fingers were quick and sure on a pulse point, her palm an old promise on a brow. She didn't ask for a name yet. She checked the world and let the world see it was being checked. Michael stepped back just enough to give the medics room and angled his light to the floor, careful not to put it in anybody's eyes. The beam washed over rough boards and cracked concrete, tracked the path his boots and Rex's paws had drawn through powdery dust. That's when he noticed it. Something small and wrong, half-wedged beneath a splintered crate near the boarded corner. A metal box, dented and low, the size of a library book. Its dull surface, clotted with dirt, as if it had been sleeping and didn't want to be woken. He moved toward it with a calm he didn't entirely feel. The lid carried a combination lock whose numbers were scarred by hard use, the wheel worn smooth at the edges. Someone had thought about this box more than once. Across the top, a single word had been scraped into the metal with something sharp and hurried. Confidential. The letters weren't neat. They were certain. He crouched and brushed dirt away with 2 fingers. The grit rasped under his glove. The weight of the thing told its own story, heavier than it looked, as if information could learn to sit like iron. He imagined, unhelpfully, what could be inside. Keys to rooms with no windows. Names wearing the wrong futures. Orders that turned children. Said, secure scene, wait for detectives, tag and bag. But protocol had not climbed down a trap door into a room that smelled like fear taught to behave. Protocol did not have to watch truth get filed in the wrong cabinet. He held the box and felt the scales in him tilt. Duty, trust, the impossible math of protecting a child and a case at once. He lifted his gaze to Carla. "We'll move her up," she whispered, reading the question he hadn't asked yet. "Slow. She doesn't like hands. She does like him." A flick of her chin at Rex. "We'll let the dog walk with us." "Copy," Michael said. He slid the box into the deep cargo pocket on his right thigh. It fit badly, as if it knew it wasn't supposed to be kept in a body's keeping. The word on its lid ghosted his glove as he let go. Confidential. He felt it, like a smudge that would not wash. "Okay, Abigail," Carla said, the name easy and soft, as if they'd always known it. "We're going to go upstairs, where there's air that doesn't bite, and light that isn't mean. You can hold on to Rex the whole way. I'll be right here." The girl gave the smallest nod. Carla and Evan worked around the fact of the dog and the putty softness of Abigail's knees, coaxing movement from a body that had learned to keep still. They didn't peel her away from Rex. They created a way for both to move together. Rex rising first in a fluid uncoil, Abigail following with one hand sunk in his coat, the other hand hidden somewhere under Michael's jacket, where she might have found a leftover warmth and mistaken it for summer. The climb was a slow miracle. Each step spoke its worry. Michael went ahead to clear edges and angles, to take the first contact with any world that wished to press too hard. He moved a shoulder into the hatch frame to make space. He lifted a low stack of trays so no metal would bite. When Abigail flinched at a noise she couldn't see, he flattened his palm for her to see. Fingers open. Nothing here that wants to hurt. At the lip of the trapdoor, light from the art room spilled down like water. The first breath of it touched Abigail's face, and she blinked into it, eyes narrowing, tears brightening the dirt into clean tracks. The dog waited until her feet found the last tread, then stepped up beside her, his flank a guardrail. They broke the surface together. The art room was suddenly too large. Ceilings high, windows throwing a pale afternoon over everything. The rain had gentled into threads. People gathered by instinct at the edge of crisis. 2 officers from patrol, the principal with his tie crooked, a teacher who'd forgotten to put down the roll of masking tape in his metal rail, until a gloved hand stroked his head in thanks and asked for an inch. He gave a half-inch and then thought better of giving more. "Michael," Evans said quietly. "We'll do vitals in the rig. She needs heat and sugar, not words." "Right," he said. He stepped to the side where Abigail could see him without effort and let his hand be there, palm out, not asking, letting her eyes do the choosing. She looked, held, then let go. It was enough. The wheels rattled across the paint-scarred floor. The heavy cabinet they'd shoved stood crooked, as if embarrassed by its part in things. The broken boards made their small pile at the foot of its shame. Michael felt heat gather in the hollows along his jaw and travel down into his hands. He set the feeling in the place right behind his sternum, where he kept the names of the people he worked for, the living and the dead. Rex bumped his leg as they walked, a silent message. Here. In the hall, sound found its larger body again. Voices, radios, the rain's patient chorus. The gurney cleared the doorframe, turned toward the exit, and all the world became distance measured in tile. Abigail's fingers never left Rex's coat. Twice, Michael saw her mouth shape a word that didn't travel. The second time it did. "Thank you." The syllables were hoarse and raw, a syllable for each of them, or all of them to the dog. Michael answered with a nod that asked nothing back. At the ambulance, the doors opened on bright, clean light and the neat hum of purpose. Carla climbed in. Evans steadied the frame. "We'll page you from St. Luke's," Carla called. "She'll ask for him. If it's allowed—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The world made rules. Sometimes the heart made better ones. "I'll bring him," Michael said. The doors closed with that soft hydraulic finality ambulances have. The kind that makes a prayer out of silence. Sirens didn't wail this close to a child. The engine took up a deeper note, and the rig eased away, red lights stroking rain with patient hands. For a beat, there was nothing to do but stand in the echo. Rex shook once, a ripple starting at his neck and running clean to his tail, then looked up at Michael with eyes still full of the basement. Michael set his palm on the dog's head and left it there, feeling the warm skull beneath the fur, the steadiness he had borrowed 100 times. Only then did the box announce itself again, the edge of it pressing the seam of his cargo corridor, toward the classroom with its crooked cabinet and patient paper crane. The rain ticked against the block glass. In that steady, homely music, Michael Harrington understood that the weight in his pocket was not just metal. It was a door with no handle waiting to be found from the wrong side. He touched the box once through the fabric, as if to test whether it meant to burn. It didn't. It just waited. Rex bumped his knee again, a reminder to keep moving. "Come on, partner," Michael said, and his voice had that quiet steadiness again, the one that carries people from one room to the next when they can't carry themselves. They walked back toward the art room and the trapdoor, and the work of telling the truth in the right order. Rain writing its slow scripture on the windows, while the box wrote a different kind inside his pocket, one he would have to read whether he wanted to or not. The apartment was quiet, in the way only certain storms could create. A silence not born from peace, but from the hush that settles after the world takes a breath and forgets to exhale. Outside, the wind threaded itself through gutters and alleyways, tugging at windows with long, tired fingers. Rain tapped steadily at the panes, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, like it hadn't made up its mind whether to lull the night to sleep or keep it awake. Inside, the refrigerator hummed with the steady cadence of an old machine still doing its job long after the need for perfection had passed. A single overhead bulb cast a yellowish glow across the small kitchen table, where a metal box sat squarely at the center, like an unanswered question. Michael Harrington sat opposite it, elbows on knees, fingers laced, the same posture he'd held for 23 minutes now, by the kitchen clock's slow, deliberate ticks. He hadn't touched the box since he placed it there, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved except to shift the weight off his bad knee when it started to whisper its old complaint. Below the table, Rex lay curled, his breathing deep and slow, the tip of his tail occasionally twitching in some dream neither of them would speak about. The dog had eaten and drank when they returned, circled the space twice, then dropped like a worn quilt to the floor beside Michael's boots. Loyalty doesn't require a room full of noise, but for Michael, quiet was never just quiet. The box had come from the dirt under Roosevelt High, from a basement that hadn't been listed in blueprints, with air that tasted like secrets. Confidential had been scratched into the metal lid, not printed, not embossed, scratched with a tool, by hand, hastily, like someone had known they didn't have time to do it any other way. And it was heavy, heavier than its size suggested. That was what unnerved him most. He had spent the better part of the evening cleaning up. Rex hosed off in the tub, mud tracked from the basements.
An update yet. That would come tomorrow. For now, the only other witness in the apartment was a dog who never repeated anything out loud. Michael's hand twitched toward the box, stopped mid-reach. He knew the right answer. He knew what protocol would demand. Chain of custody, evidence tags. Submit it before he'd even taken off his uniform. But the girl's voice still sat behind his ears. They said no one would ever find me. That sentence hadn't left him, not in the car, not in the elevator, not in the long moment where he stood in his living room, box in hand, unable to remember setting down his keys. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose, eyes never leaving the metal edges. Rex stirred slightly, shifting position, paws twitching. His ear flicked toward Michael, but he didn't open his eyes. The dog knew when silence meant danger, and when it meant something worse, decision. Michael studied the worn etching again. There was no lock, no combination, but something about the way it sat, tight, sealed, final, made it feel like opening it might unspool something too big to push back in. He thought about the hallway at Roosevelt High, about the splintered door, about the sound of his foot hitting the floor of the basement, and knowing, in that moment, that he'd crossed into a part of the story no one was supposed to read. The box had a seam, thin, nearly invisible, a hairline divide where the top met the bottom. He imagined lifting it, imagining the creak of old metal, the smell that would come out first, whatever paper or plastic or metal might be waiting inside. Names, photos, notes, or worse, nothing at all. Because silence, when planned, is more dangerous than anything spoken. He stood abruptly, pacing once, twice. His reflection moved in the glass of the window, shoulders tense, face unreadable. He didn't like the man he saw in the windows, never had. Mirrors told you the truth too quickly. Windows told you what the world might see. He rubbed his hands together, exhaled, flexed his fingers, sat back down. Rex lifted his head now, just slightly, eyes open, glowing faint amber in the kitchen light. "You want me to leave it alone too?" Michael asked softly. His voice felt louder than it should have in that space. The dog blinked once. Not agreement, not refusal, just present as always, a witness, a partner. Michael's fingers reached again, slower this time, brushed the cold edge of the lid. The box didn't bite, it didn't buzz or tremble
or give off any sign it was anything more than a storage container. But still the weight, not the physical one, the other kind. Spine like a tightening rope. He thought about the parents, about how many would sleep tonight not knowing if their child was lost or just hidden. And then he realized he was never going to sleep until he knew. Michael closed his hand around the lip of the lid, felt the chill press into his skin. Rex shifted behind him, the dog's weight pressing into the back of his calf in a quiet touch that said, "I'm here, whether you open it or not." Michael didn't open the box. Not yet. But his fingers tightened, and in that still kitchen, with the fridge humming like a lullaby no one believed, he leaned forward and whispered to the dark metal surface, "If you're what I think you are, we've got a long night ahead." The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't soothe, but asked questions. Rain whispered against the kitchen window, like it hadn't stopped since Roosevelt High, though Michael knew it had. He'd driven home under a patchy sky, headlights cutting through mist that didn't know whether it meant to fall or rise. But inside, the silence felt unchanged. The box sat on the table, still closed, still heavy. Confidential, stamped across its battered surface like a dare. He hadn't touched it again since setting it down, but somehow it filled the room more than anything else. Larger than the table, louder than the rain, weightier than the gun holstered across from it. He stood by the sink, one hand resting on the counter, the other holding the lip of a chipped coffee mug. Cold, hours-old coffee lingered at the bottom, untouched. His gaze stayed anchored to the box, like if he stared long enough, the metal might blink first. Behind his eyes, her voice played again. "They said no one would ever find me." The words had carved themselves into something beneath his skin, looping on a quiet reel, pulling the worst of his memory forward in slivers. There had been another girl, years ago, different town, different shadows. Name was Lana, age 9, last seen at a playground, just before dusk. The Amber Alert came too late. By the time her coat was found by the riverbank, Michael had already learned how to read fear in silence. Her face still lived in the quiet hours after midnight, when exhaustion wasn't strong enough to hold memory back. She hadn't been found. Not really. Abigail had. And yet, the victory rang hollow, because she hadn't been lost. She'd been put away, hidden, stored, like someone had measured her worth and how easy it would be to forget her. Michael's jaw tightened. The muscles there had long ago learned to carry things the rest of his body didn't know what to do with. He moved to the table, rested both palms on its edge, and stared at the box from closer. Those stories had happy endings. Behind him, claws tapped softly against tile. Rex. Michael didn't have to turn to know. He felt the weight of the dog's presence the way you feel warmth in a room that isn't empty anymore. Rex crossed the space with slow, padded steps, then settled by his side, first a pause at his right calf, then a full lean of furred body against denim. The pressure was deliberate, grounding, like a hand on the shoulder. Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You feel it too, huh?" he muttered, lowering one hand to scratch behind Rex's ear. The dog responded with a soft sigh and a lean-in that said everything without needing a sound. He wasn't asking for attention, he was giving it. The fragments in Michael's mind, the broken glass flashes of past cases, missing posters, crying mothers, zip ties left behind in wooded clearings, all began to slide into place again. Not neatly, not cleanly, but like puzzle pieces someone had been forced to fit even though they didn't belong together. He thought about the second Abigail had looked at him, really looked at him. Not through him, like victims sometimes did when their gaze hadn't come back yet, but at him. Her mouth had trembled. Her fingers had tightened around Rex's collar. She hadn't said it again, but she didn't need to. The words were already in him. They said no one would ever find me. And beneath that, what if we hadn't? What if Rex hadn't stopped? What if his instincts had dulled with age, or his leash had been just 1 inch shorter? What if the backup had come before Michael had kicked that door? What if they'd checked the art room a day later, an hour later? It wouldn't have been a rescue. It would have been a recovery. Rex shifted and looked up, eyes bright and fixed on Michael's face. Like he could smell the guilt before it even settled. "I know, buddy," Michael whispered. "I know she's safe now." But safety was a fragile word, and it had a way of expiring in places like Roosevelt High. His eyes drifted back to the box. There was no key, no instructions, just the word burned into the lid like a brand. Confidential. A locked box. A missing girl. A hidden trapdoor. A cabinet that had been shoved, not stacked. It wasn't just that someone had hidden her, it was that they'd done it before. You don't build hidden doors on impulse. You don't nail boards with fresh lumber unless you've measured it out. And you don't keep a steel lockbox under floorboards unless you know you'll be coming back. Rex let out a low huff, then sat up straighter, still close, still leaning in. His presence had always been more than protection. With Rex, Michael didn't need to be the version of himself who all to do with this thing. He looked at the box. Whatever's inside, it's not just about her. And he knew deep in his ribs, in that marrow memory where instincts live long after evidence fades, that this wasn't an isolated case. He reached for his phone, but stopped short of calling anyone. Not yet. Not until he knew what he was holding. Rex nudged him again, more urgent this time, like a pulse against the edge of hesitation. Michael looked down. The dog's eyes were unwavering. No fear, just readiness. "You think I'm right to be scared?" he asked. Rex didn't blink. Michael let the silence stretch before he whispered, "Yeah, me too." And still the box waited, heavy, quiet, and full of things that refused to stay buried. Michael turned the box over in his hands for the 5th time that hour. The weight hadn't changed, but something about it felt heavier now, as if whatever was locked inside had started to press outward. The metal was cool beneath his fingers, like touching a memory that didn't belong to you. He ran his thumb along the edges, slow, deliberate, searching for some imperfection in the surface, not a scratch, a clue. Rex sat by the doorway watching, not impatient, not relaxed, just present, the same way he always was when Michael was circling something he didn't want to say aloud. In another life, Michael might have been comforted by the quiet, but not now, not after Abigail, not after the trapdoor. He flipped the box again, letting it land with a muted thud on the wooden table. A gust of wind pushed against the apartment window, and for a moment the rain found its voice again, tapping out a rhythm like a code. Michael leaned forward, squinting under the dim kitchen light. The top of the box still read "Confidential," etched by hand, the letters uneven and carved with pressure that suggested panic. But now, along the bottom edge, almost invisible beneath a smear of dried soil, he saw something else. He reached for a cloth, wiped carefully. LHS, room 219. The letters were faint, the metal worn in places, but it was there. His stomach went cold. LHS. Roosevelt High's old name, Lincoln Hudson Secondary, before the district merger, before they rebranded the school to make it sound less like a prison. He remembered the name only because his father had attended under it. The acronym still showed up on some of the ancient wiring panels and boiler room blueprints, relics from a time when no one thought buildings needed to feel safe, just solid. And then there was the number, room 219. He didn't have to think long. He knew it. The art room. His jaw clenched. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone had etched that into the box deliberately, not just to identify where it had been hidden, but maybe where it was meant to return. He looked at Rex. The dog hadn't moved, but Michael swore he'd seen something flicker in those amber eyes the second the number formed on his lips. Room 219. "It's the art room," Michael muttered. "Where else do you hide something so wrong it starts to look like an expression?" He stood slowly, the box still in his hand, now holding it more like an answer than a question. The kitchen chair scraped gently against the floor as he stepped away from the table. Rex stood with him, no command needed. "You knew," Michael said to him, not expecting a reply but getting one anyway. The dog's tail gave a single, low sweep, not joy, just acknowledgement. Michael set the box back down, this time with more care than before. He stared at it for a long moment, watching the way the overhead bulb caught in the letters like a flashlight against a half-remembered face. LHS, room 219. It wasn't just a place they found Abigail. It was the center. The room wasn't just a container. It was part of the system, a hinge in the mechanism, a stage. And someone had thought he wouldn't come back. He moved to the coat rack by the door, slipping his jacket on by muscle memory. His badge hung by the entryway mirror. He stared at it, not for identification, but as a reminder. There are days the badge feels heavy, and there are days it feels like it's made of nothing at all. He clipped it to his belt, not because he needed the authority, but because tonight it needed to be worn like a name, one you don't forget. Rex approached, as if sensing the shift not in tone but in energy. His tail was low, his body alert. Michael looked down at him. "You ready?" The dog didn't wag, didn't tilt his head like a cartoon of agreement. He just stood taller. Michael grabbed his flashlight and a fresh radio battery. He double-checked his sidearm. He wasn't planning on drawing it, but tonight didn't feel like something you planned for. He looked at the box once more. There was a good argument to leave it for evidence. Call the precinct, make it official. Let someone else piece it together. But the girl was real. The trapdoor was real. The sob in the dark was real. And this box had her school's name on it. No, not just her school. Her room. Michael reached into the drawer and grabbed a Ziploc evidence pouch, slid the box inside, zipped it shut, sealed it in silence. He tucked it gently into the side pocket of his duty bag, then slung the strap over his shoulder. At the door, he hesitated. Something about stepping out into the night made everything feel sharper, like the edges of the world were suddenly carved instead of drawn. The clock on the microwave blinked at 11:17 p.m. "Too late to be rational," he muttered. Rex stood at the threshold, tail flicking once. Michael opened the door. The hallway was dim, quiet, carrying the echo of city life beyond the walls, horns softened by weather, the rumble of a distant train. Rain had been speaking. Where the decision had already been made the moment Rex stopped walking. The sun hadn't fully risen when Michael pulled into the Roosevelt High lot. The sky was pewter, clouds hanging low like an unsent warning. Mist clung to the asphalt, soft in the pockmarks of neglect. He shut off the engine and sat for a moment. The school loomed ahead, squat gray brick scarred by decades of weather and silence. A building that had seen too much and said too little. Beside him Rex sat taut in the passenger seat, ears twitching at whispers only he seemed to hear. Michael scratched behind them. "Let's finish what we started." They stepped into the morning chill. The side door gave a groan as he unlocked it, metal on metal like something old, remembering. Inside, only the thin yellow strips of emergency light cut the dark. Posters curled on the walls, pep rallies, anti-bullying campaigns, art shows, long past. Lockers lined both sides like iron lungs that had exhaled for good. Room 219 waited at the hall's end. The caution tape across the doorway sagged like a half-closed wound. Michael ducked under. The air was stale, damp, metallic, like old pennies in the throat. Rex slipped in behind, nose low, muscles tense. A bulb flickered overhead, shadows moving when they shouldn't. Easels leaned like drunks, sketches curled with moisture. Against the far wall, the cabinet had been pulled aside, trapdoor rimmed in red tape. Notes clung to clipboards, paper flapping in the draft from the broken window. Michael paused, scanning. Something started here, he murmured. Rex whined softly. That's when he saw the mural, half hidden behind stools, unfinished. Children in silhouette, holding hands, no faces, some marked with red. One bore a key on its chest, the smallest, a leash. His skin prickled. Not art, a message. He turned back to the trap door, beam cutting dust and cobwebs, empty crates below. But at the edge, faint chalk lines formed a square, a cradle. The metal box he carried in the evidence bag had once belonged here. This wasn't just storage, it was a drop point. Someone planned to come back, he muttered. Rex had already moved. He scratched 3 sharp marks at the baseboard. Michael crouched, found a seam in the plaster, nearly invisible. A shallow indentation, a latch. He pressed. The panel sighed open, exhaling cold air laced with that same metallic tang. Behind it, a cavity, no deeper than a locker, a crude shelf, folders stacked by the dozen, corners grayed, tabs scrawled with initials and codes. Michael slid on gloves. The first folder held a boy's photo, gymnasium background, cowlick, page scored with black bars. Handwritten notes escaped the censor. Sensory deprivation tolerated. Behavioral modification promising. Continue exposure intervals. Escalate stimulus. Report to Hale. Michael tasted metal. He eased the paper down before his fingers creased it with anger. One folder carried no photo, just a typed line. Candidate, consent waived. Dated recently. Signed, Hale, Superintendent. He bagged Abigail's file, the consent waived folder, and an unlabeled flash drive marked only BMOD vids. His breath shifted. He knew because Rex noticed it first, chuffing as if to steady him. Michael inhaled slowly, the way you do balancing above a fall. He photographed the cavity, every file's order, then closed it partway. Not locked. Truth didn't deserve to be buried again. That's when the door creaked. Michael froze. Rex's ears pricked, silent but wired. A voice followed, mild, too mild. Ah, didn't expect anyone here this early. Michael turned. Mr. Anders, art teacher, corduroy blazer, elbow patches, thermos in hand. His smile seemed pasted on. Didn't think the staff were back till Thursday, Michael said evenly. Forgot a sketch pad, Anders replied, stepping in. His gaze lingered too long on the wall panel. Michael shifted subtly, blocking it with his shoulder. School resource officer, Michael Reyes, he offered. Oh, I know who you are. Anders' eyes flicked to Rex. And this must be Rex, bit of a legend. Rex didn't move. Smart dogs, Anders said. Intuitive. The pause felt weighted. Michael kept his tone flat. Saved lives. Anders chuckled softly, but it rang wrong. He twirled a paintbrush between his fingers. Funny. Most offices don't poke into walls. You've got an interesting definition of look around.
Wasn't that well hidden? Michael said. Hidden enough for a decade, Anders replied. His voice had dropped a register. Dig too deep, officer. People start asking questions. Not always the kind you want. Michael stepped forward an inch at a time. I'm counting on that. The smile cracked, then vanished. Anders's eyes cooled. You think you've found something? I think this room was used for things that don't belong in a school, Michael said evenly. And some of the people who hid it wore elbow patches and smiles. Anders placed the brush down. You're a guest here. Best not overstay your welcome. Rex shifted, rising with silent precision. Lockers dull. Bulletin boards holding ghosts of semesters past. At the steps, Anders paused.
Careful what you chase, Officer Reyes. Some things were meant to stay buried. Dig deep enough, you might not like what comes up.
Michael met his eyes. Neither will they. Anders nodded once, turned, and walked into the mist. Michael waited until he vanished. Rex exhaled once, sharp. Michael glanced down. Yeah, he murmured. He knows. They turned back into the building together. Somewhere inside these walls, truth was shifting, nervous, waiting to be dragged into the light. They came at dawn, 3 black shapes sliding into the staff lot like secrets unsaid. Fog softened the asphalt, but the men cut through it. Dark coats, darker ties, shoes that didn't squeak. They moved like people who had rehearsed entering a room and owning it. Inside Roosevelt High, the halls hummed weakly under fluorescent light. Michael waited at the end of the art corridor, Rex sitting taut at his side. The shepherd looked calm until you saw the ears pricked forward, measuring threat. Room 219's window had been taped overnight, plastic fluttering in the draft, carrying that thin metallic scent Michael had learned meant warning. The front doors banged once. 4 sets of steps followed, firm and unhurried. The office staff protested, cut short by clipped voices. Then the men turned the corner, and the hallway dropped a degree. The leader, gray at the temples, lifted a credential in a practiced flick. Silver seal, hologram shimmer. Expensive, maybe real, maybe worse. Special investigations, state level, will take custody of the recovered material. His voice carried assumption, not request. Rex shifted forward. The leash drew tight, then eased, like leather remembering its job. Good morning, Michael said, politeness as armor. He had already read the credential twice, catching imperfections. Embossed edge too soft, crest line slightly wrong. If fake, it was the best money could buy. If real, rot at the root, the tall one angled wider. We understand you recovered digital media and records. We'll need those. Now. His coat opened just enough to show the rig at his shoulder. Michael stayed on the gray-templed man. And you are. Already told you, jurisdiction is ours. Michael's tone stayed even. Funny. I've got a missing child, an assault, a burglary, and a concealed sublevel off the books. Sounds like crimes for a court, not a filing cabinet. The youngest spoke softly, eyes on Rex. Chain of custody. You hand it over, we sign. You're clean. Clean. The word curdled in the air. Rex pressed against Michael's shin, steadying. Tall one said mildly, the drive, the files, the box. The box. Michael felt its ghost weight. He'd locked it in his trunk, but the flash drive was close, sealed in his jacket where the heartbeat lived. Rex gave a low sound, hackles rising. One suit shifted back. You're making the dog nervous, the gray man said. He's not the nervous type, Michael answered. The man's eyes cooled.
This is bigger than your district, bigger than you. We're your buffer. Feels more like a wall, Michael said. The hallway held its breath. A paper crane above the art room twisted in the draft. You have a warrant? We have authority. Different shells, the younger one sighed. Officer, don't make this hard. Rex's growl dropped into bedrock. Michael felt the vibration, resolve, not fear. He pictured Abigail's crayon drawing, the sterile room, Anders smiling, Hale in shadows. He heard her whisper, "They said no one would ever find me." "You'll get a receipt," the tall one added. "We're not villains." The word villains landed cheap. Michael let silence strip it. Then, "You can wait. I'm making a call." He raised his radio. 1 minute, the gray man warned. Michael pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12 at Roosevelt. I need—" The corridor froze. The suits didn't move. Neither did Rex. But Michael knew whatever lived in their pockets wasn't just badges. It was permission, and he was about to test where it ended. 2 uniforms appeared, guiding Rick Dempsey, pale, blinking, down the hall. His eyes widened at the suits, fear raw. "Change of plan," the tall one murmured. "Package is here." Michael's decision arrived like weather. No speech, just motion. Radio down, hand on Rex's collar. "We're relocating the witness, now." "You're not relocating anyone," the gray man said softly. "No," Michael replied. "I'm not. Rex, with." The shepherd flowed into motion, precise and fluid. Michael grabbed Rick's elbow, head down, walk. They moved, under the paper crane, into the stairwell. The door slammed, cool air rose. Rex bounded down in rhythm. A hand reached for the door. Michael let it swing back with a dull thunk, not enough to injure, just to persuade. Through the gap, he met the gray man's eyes. "You can't run this forever. I only need to run it today." Rick stumbled, caught himself. "Keep moving," Michael said. At the landing, he listened, steps above, organized. Rex pressed close, waiting. Michael touched his shoulder. "Good, with me." They pushed through the service corridor. Low ceilings, humming tubes, cinder block the color of wet chalk. The air is universal key. Loop the other through Rick's belt. "You run, you drag my car. Push!" Together they forced the bar. Rain washed over them. 3 black sedans idled, exhaust ghosting. 1 door opened slow. "Move," Michael barked. They ran, splashing, breathless. Rex surged as if rain were air. Michael steered them toward his cruiser. Doors slammed behind, suits spilling out. Measured even in pursuit. "Back seat!" Rick fumbled in. "Rex, front!" The shepherd vaulted clean, braced in the passenger well. Michael slid behind the wheel. The engine roared. Tires hissed. Wipers swept. A sedan slid forward, blocking. Michael swung hard left, the cruiser fishtailing, then catching. Not today. They burst through a maintenance lane, shouldered a chained gate. Links snapped. The gate groaned. They were on the street. Sirens converged, some theirs, some not. The city blurred by. Murals with vandalized halos, laundromats glowing open, a diner coughing grease into the rain. The sedans followed without lights, silent, relentless. At an intersection, Officer Perez flagged him down. Michael saw his name on Perez's lips. He drove through the yellow. Perez didn't follow. The sedans did. The hinge turned inside Michael, the one separating law from promise. He had crossed it when he unlocked Rick's cuffs. Maybe earlier when he let a child's drawing become evidence. Rain thickened. Wipers beat furiously. The arterial opened toward the river road. He took it, cruiser leaping. The sedans stayed close. Sirens braided the air. Calm arrived, cold and final. He had done what couldn't be undone. He would answer for it, just not to the men in black. He glanced at Rex. With me. The dog's ear flicked, steady as ever. The road is unspooled, gray and endless. Rain turned every surface honest. Beside him, the shepherd watched the distance as if he'd always known it would come to this. Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. The line was crossed. Nowhere back, only forward. The sedans came at dawn, 3 black shapes sliding into the staff lot, like secrets no one meant to say aloud. Fog pooled over the asphalt, but the men who stepped out of those cars cut clean through it. Dark coats, darker ties, shoes that didn't squeak. Their movements had the economy of people who had rehearsed how to enter a room and own it. Inside Roosevelt High, the halls hummed with weak fluorescent light. Michael waited at the end of the art corridor, Rex sitting sharp at his side. The shepherd's stillness looked calm until you saw the ears. Pricked, forward, already measuring the danger. Room 219's broken window had been taped overnight, plastic fluttering in the draft. It carried that thin, metallic scent Michael had begun to associate.
Hall dropped a degree. The lead man, gray at the temples, lifted a credential in a practiced flick. Silver seal, hologram shimmer. Expensive, maybe real, maybe worse. Special investigations, state level. We'll take custody of any recovered material. He didn't ask if there was any. He spoke like ownership had always been his. Rex shifted, chest lifting, paw a half-inch forward. The leash went taut in Michael's hand and eased again, like the leather remembered its job. "Good morning," Michael said, "because politeness is armor." He had already read the credential twice and caught the imperfections, the embossed edge too soft, the crest line slightly wrong. If it was fake, it was the best money could buy. If real, it was rot at the root. Another man, tall, stepped sideways, widening their angle. "We understand you recovered digital media and records. We'll need those, now." His coat opened just enough to flash the rig at his shoulder. Rex's breathing slowed, his own metronome. Michael kept his eyes on the gray-templed one. "And you are?" "Already told you," the man said, voice clipped. "Jurisdiction is ours. This is controlled." Michael's reply came even. "Funny, because I have a missing child, an assault, a school burglary, and a concealed sublevel that wasn't on any blueprint. Sounds like crimes for a court, not a filing cabinet." The youngest suit spoke softly, gaze fixed on Rex. "Chain of custody. You hand it over, we sign. You're clean." The word clean curdled in the air. Michael felt his jaw tighten. Rex pressed briefly against his shin, steadying, then stepped forward again. "You're early," Michael said. "Most people wait for coffee." "We don't drink it," the gray-templed man replied, smiling thinly. He scanned the room, the evidence flags, the taped glass. "You removed items. I preserved a crime scene." "And now you'll preserve your career," the tall one said mildly. "The drive, the files, the box." The box. Michael felt its ghost weight. He'd locked it in his trunk, but the flash drive was close, sealed inside his jacket where heartbeat and warmth lived. Rex gave a low sound, not loud, but tectonic. Hackles rose in a shadow only trained eyes noticed. One suit shifted back involuntarily. "You're making the dog nervous," the gray-templed one said. "He's not the nervous type," Michael answered. The man's eyes cooled. "This is bigger than your district, bigger than you. We're your buffer." "Feels more like a wall," Michael said. The hallway held its breath. A paper crane above the art room door twisted in the draft like a tired heartbeat. "You have a warrant?" Michael asked. "We have authority." Different shelves, the younger one sighed, as if boredom were a weapon. "Officer, don't make the—" He pictured Abigail's crayon drawing. The sterile room, Anders smiling, Hale watching from the shadows. He pictured her hand buried in Rex's fur, whispering, "They said no one would ever find me." "You'll get a receipt,"
the tall one said. "We're not villains." The word villains landed like cheap perfume. Michael let silence strip it bare. Then he said, "You can wait, I'm making a call." He raised his radio, thumb poised. "1 minute," the gray-templed man warned. "Then we're done playing." Michael pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12 inside Roosevelt. I need—" The corridor froze on the edge of collision. The suits didn't move. Neither did Rex. But Michael knew. Whatever lived in their pockets wasn't just badges. It was permission. And he was about to test where it ended. 2 uniforms appeared, guiding Rick Dempsey, pale, blinking, down the hall. His eyes widened at the suits, fear blooming raw. "Change of plan," the tall suit murmured. "The package is all here." Michael's decision arrived like weather. No speech, just motion. Thumb off the radio, knee angled, hand closing on Rex's collar. "We're relocating the witness, now." "You're not relocating anyone," the gray-templed one said softly. "No," Michael replied, "I'm not." "Rex, with." The shepherd flowed into motion, precise and fluid. Michael grabbed Rick's elbow. "Head down, we're walking." They moved. Under the paper crane, into the stairwell. The door slammed behind them. Cooler air rose from below. Rex bounded down in rhythm, nails clicking on concrete. A hand reached for the door. Michael let it swing back, hitting with a dull thunk. Not enough to injure, just enough to persuade. Through the narrowing gap he met the gray man's eyes. "You can't run this forever," the man said. "I only need to run it today." The door sealed shut. They descended fast, the stairwell ringing with their breath. Rick stumbled, caught himself. "Where—" "Keep moving," Michael said. "Eyes on my shoulder." At the landing he listened, hand on cinder block. Steps followed above, organized, steady. Rex pressed close, waiting. Michael blessed him with a touch. "Good, with me." They pushed through the service corridor, low ceilings, humming tubes, cinder block walls the color of wet chalk. The air smelled of mop water and old metal. Behind them the door banged, footsteps multiplied. At the loading dock, the crash bar refused. Locked. Michael cursed. Rick's keys were gone. Michael freed one cuff with his universal key, looped the other through Rick's belt. Michael steered them toward his cruiser. Doors slammed behind, the suit spilling out, measured, even in pursuit. "Back seat," Michael ordered. Rick fumbled in. "Rex, front." The shepherd vaulted cleanly, braced in the passenger well. Michael slid behind the wheel, engine roaring alive. Tires hissed, wipers swept, radio spat static. A sedan slid forward to block the exit. Michael swung hard left across the lot. Tires screamed on wet paint, the cruiser fishtailing, then catching. Not today. They burst through the maintenance lane, shouldered a chained gate. Links snapped. The gate groaned. They were on the street, sirens already converging, some theirs, some not. The city blurred by, murals with vandalized halos, laundromats glowing open, a diner coughing grease into the rain. The sedans followed without lights, silent and relentless. At an intersection, Officer Perez flagged him down, siren wailing. Michael saw his name on the man's lips. He drove through the yellow. Perez didn't follow. The sedans did. The hinge turned inside Michael, the one separating law from promise. He'd crossed it when he unlocked Rick's cuffs. Maybe earlier, when he let a child's drawing become evidence. Rain thickened, wipers beat furiously, the arterial opened toward the river road. He took it, the cruiser leaping forward. The sedans stayed close, calculating. Sirens braided the air. Calm arrived, cold and final. He had done what couldn't be undone. He would answer for it, just not to the men in black. He glanced at Rex. "With me." The dog's ear flicked, steady as always. The road is unspooled, gray and endless ahead. Rain turned every surface honest, and beside him, the shepherd watched the distance, as if he'd always known it would come to this. Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. He had crossed the line. There was no way back, only forward. Morning arrived gently at St. Luke's, gray light slipping past the blind, a narrow band across the linoleum. Machines hummed softly, the faint beep of a monitor, the hush of air through a vent that smelled of antiseptic and lemon. On the windowsill, someone had left a paper crane whose shadow cut a neat triangle across the pale wall. Abigail slept uneasily. When she woke, movement came in pieces, eyes first, then a hand clutching a small, stuffed German shepherd with felt ears that stood too straight. Its tag still read Rex in block letters. He had brought it himself. Rex had carried the toy down the hall like an offering, placed it carefully on her blanket, then left without complaint. The part of him she needed had stayed. Michael stood in the doorway, cap in his hands, rain still clinging to his jacket. "Strangers," he said with a half-smile. Her fingers tightened around the toy. He brought it?" "He did," Michael said. "Carried it the whole way. We were going to name him for you, but the tag beat us to it." A shadow of a smile touched her mouth. It smells like him." "It probably does. He insists on sharing his perfume." Her breath released slowly. She stroked the toy's ear, eyes fixed on the seam. "They watched," she whispered, "even when they didn't talk. Shoes, papers, a little red light in the corner. I tried to sleep where it couldn't see me, but it always could." Michael kept his focus on her. "Did they tell you their names?" She stiffened. He raised a hand. "Only if you want, just what you need me to know." "They said I was part of something, a program. If I did good, I could go home. If I did bad, I had to stay." "What was good?" "Answering, staying quiet, not crying. Sometimes they made noise. Other times it was the opposite of noise, the kind that feels like your bones are listening." Michael understood. "Did anyone ever call you by your name?" Her mouth trembled. "Once, a woman. Mostly it was subject or candidate or control. They said phase 2. I didn't know where phase 1 was." Anger tightened in Michael's chest. "Sometimes," she added, "the art man was there. He looked at the wall, not me. He said he was sorry once, but to the floor." Michael let it sit. "Did they wear uniforms like mine?" "No, not shiny badges. Cards, on strings." He nodded. "You're doing just right." A nurse came in, cuff whispering around her arm. Numbers blinked, vanished. The nurse gave Michael a quiet nod of encouragement and slipped out. Abigail shifted. "I couldn't tell day from night, only pipes clicking, footsteps slower sometimes. I tried to pretend I was under the art room table at school. It didn't work, but I tried." Michael wanted to do something useful but held still. "You found your way to him," he said, nodding at the toy. "He found me," she corrected. For the first time her voice held steady. "I thought I made the sound up the first day, in the wall, did I?" "You didn't," he said. "He heard you. That's the only reason we came. He believes in sounds others miss." Her eyes filled. "I was sure I dreamed you when the door opened." "Sometimes good things don't argue with dreams," Michael said. Silence settled, not heavy but livable. "They wrote stuff down," she blurted, "on clipboards. Numbers, like I was a math problem. Sometimes they said, "Hale will want this," but they weren't good at whispering. Michael nodded once, storing the name safely. Hummed agreement. Outside, orderlies pushed carts through the mist. "Can you sit a little longer?" she asked. "I can, after a while," she said. "When you told me they were wrong, my body felt like it remembered something. Like summer." "Summer hangs on," he said. "Even in winter it hides in small places." She nodded, accepting it. The stuffed dog's ear was already worn flatter where her thumb had smoothed it. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised. "I do want that," she said. At the door he paused. "Abigail, you're not a program. You're a person. That truth belongs to you." She whispered into the toy's ear, "I know." Michael stepped into the hall. For a moment, with his eyes closed, he could feel Rex leaning against his leg, the way he always did when the hard part and the right part were the same. Rex entered later with the quiet of someone needed, not expected. He circled the bed, sat, and waited. Abigail's hand crept from beneath the blanket and rested on his head, not to pet, but to test reality. He lowered his chin to the mattress like an anchor in uncertain water. Michael stepped back and let the curtain close. Some moments belonged only to silence. Abigail didn't cry or smile, but she breathed steadier. Her fingers stayed at the soft spot behind Rex's ear. At some point she whispered, "I heard you. You weren't afraid of the noise." Her hand curled into his fur. "You knew, even before I did." She leaned into him, forehead against his neck, breath trembling once, then calming. When Rex lifted his head at a sound, her hand tightened. "Don't go." He didn't, staying until her breathing matched his, slow, unafraid. Evening gathered at the window. Michael sat again in silence, hat on his knee. Abigail's hand moved through Rex's rough, steady now. "I heard something," she said at last. Michael nodded. "Okay." "They read a list, names, some out loud, some spelled." Her gaze drifted to the curtain's shadow. "There was an A and a B. Candidates and control. They used colors, green dots, red triangles. Some names had stars. One said, 'Don't mark them until Hale signs.' Another said, 'We can't wait for the board forever.'" Michael kept his hands open. "There was a boy named Mateo, Phase 2 transport, a girl, Rachel. She had a green dot, then a red triangle. They said, 'Reassign.'" Michael knew the names. He stayed still. "They said towns, Roosevelt, Eastgate," wider in his mind. "Some were still there," she whispered. "I could hear the air change when they opened the hatch. They said, 'Move the Phase 2s first. The board wants numbers.'" Someone laughed. "You did so well, Abigail," Michael said. "I don't want to remember." "I know, but you did, and you gave it away. That's brave." There was a boy with a crinkly jacket. He kept saying, "Pilot cluster, regional hub." Michael filed the words. "Districts, scale." They said parents make everything slow. "They're supposed to," he answered. She introduced the stuffed dog to the real one, fingers steadier now. One woman said, "No one looks under art rooms, they're always messy." And the other said, "Until they do." Abigail's eyes wavered. "Are the others okay?" "Some are. Some will be, because of you. And some we still have to find." "You'll use the dog," she said. "I will."
and the names, and the roads they thought were quiet. Satisfied, she whispered, "I don't want to say more today." "You don't have to. You've done the hard part." The rain thickened outside. The crane on the sill turned toward the dim light. "Can he stay?" she asked softly. "As long as you need." Michael stepped into the hall, phone in hand. He called a contact he hadn't used in months. "It isn't just Roosevelt," he said quietly. "We've got a list, and it has more than one zip code." Inside, the girl and the dog breathed in time. Outside, the night leaned in to listen. The apartment held the kind of quiet that made clocks sound guilty. Rain slicked the street below, turning the city metallic. Michael set his phone face down, killed the Wi-Fi, and placed the flash drive beside his laptop like a dark animal deciding whether to wake. Rex watched from the doorway, head on pause, close enough to reassure, far enough to let the work be what it was. The first folder tree bloomed. Neat directories, assessments, logistics, media, outreach. Dates ran backward for years. They've been practicing, Michael thought, and the thought felt older than him. Inside assessments, Phase 2 candidates, control group summaries, compliance scoring. An index file, consent waived memo PDF. He avoided it, opening the candidate list instead. Faces filled the screen, school photos, smiles, autumn leaves, gym curtains. Names hit like fists. Abigail Ross, Mateo King, Rachel Pierce, Brian Lowry. Too many more. He clicked Abigail. A PDF, Ross 2 intake, PDF. Checkboxes masquerading as science. Stimulus tolerant. Notes. Custodial coordination. LHS keys still valid. Use sub-level access below the boiler. Door schedule updated Fridays. Com words practiced harm. Rachel's file. A green dot turned red triangle. Reassign. In the margin. Pilot cluster expansion. Fairview, Hawthorne. Late adopters to follow after board approval. Architect's language for abduction. In control group summaries, children became subjects. Behaviors tallied like coins. Non-compliance, silence acquisition. A column repeated initials, MH, Hale. Michael's breath thinned. At last, he opened consent waived memo PDF. The language cut itself into his chest. Under provisional authority, parental consent may be deferred, provided board-designated agents stand in loco parentis. Out loud he translated, "We gave ourselves permission." Rex pressed closer, sensing the heat of Michael's fury. Michael turned to the media. A file. Room 219, Cam 3, 2307.mp4. The art room. A small figure hunched at a table. Off-camera voices. "You're part of the program. Hold still." A burst of white noise. The girl flinched, but didn't move. At minute 9, a door opened, light along the floor. Overlay text. Good compliance. Extend interval. Michael stopped it, staring at the cold glow. He thought of the hospital room, of a girl whose breathing followed a dog's steadiness. His hands ached for force, not pens. In logistics, bus routes plotted against disabled cameras. Custodian keys LHS PDF confirmed. Old keys still valid for sub-level access. Door schedules color-coded IDs in government blue. Outreach held not pamphlets, but a grant deck. Smiling stock children, promises of scalable safety. The final slide, Regional Hub, Phase 2. A star over a town not named Roosevelt.
cracks spreading across a map. In notes, Anders' handwriting,
If you're reading this, I didn't destroy it. Watch custodial contracts. The fold isn't their only name.
and smaller. I'm not brave. I hope you are. Michael wrote his own list on paper. Names: Abigail, Mateo, Rachel, Brian. Places: Eastgate, Fairview, Hawthorne. People: Hale, Anders, Dempsey. Objects: flash drive, keys, mural, the fold. He struck a line through the euphemism. When he looked up, rain had thinned to mist. He sealed the drive in an evidence sleeve and tucked it close to his badge. Rex pressed his head against his chest. Michael whispered into the fur, "Tomorrow we start pulling threads." The dog's ear comes back. He hadn't pushed harder. Told himself he'd done his best. He opened the logs. Subject resisted auditory compliance. Sedation recommended. Subject requested maternal contact. Denied. Last entry: unresponsive after water isolation. Transfer recommended. His grip tore the page. He wrote her name at the top of his notebook, circled twice. "Not forgotten," he said. His phone buzzed. Rick Dempsey. "Got something," Rick said. "Custodian contracts, most clean, but one name shows up everywhere. Eastgate, Roosevelt, Fairview, Harold Briggs. Fake address, no taxes, no union. Guess what? He was janitor at Linwood the year Amira disappeared." Michael whispered, "She didn't disappear. She was collected." "How deep does this go?" Rick asked. Michael looked at Rex, now on his feet, alert. "Past the walls, past the schools, places they don't expect us to look at." "You got back up?" Michael's eyes met the shepherd's steady gaze. "The best kind." Later, Michael pulled the old lockbox from storage. Rex stiffened, pacing, a low growl rumbling, instinct recoiling. Michael undid the clasp anyway. Inside, manila folders, a microcassette, a badge blacked out with marker. He recognized it. Agent Paul Laramie, who'd warned him off Protocol Eden before being found dead. The recorder crackled. "Phase 2 isn't coming. It's here. Tests already in Roosevelt, Fairview, Linwood. The dogs know. That's why handlers rotate. That's why canine units like..." Static. Silence. Rex barked sharply. Michael dropped it. The folders spilled photos, children on playgrounds, teachers with sealed envelopes, surveillance stills. A dossier. Subject: Omega-7. Highly responsive to canine-linked auditory conditioning. Recommend full Phase 2. Michael's stomach turned. Infrastructure, not accident. Rex shoved the lid shut with his nose, eyes locked on Michael. Not fear. Recognition. Wrong. Michael touched the badge, flipped a photo. A restrained child, wires on her temples. Directive 7, consent waived. His gut twisted. "They did this to kids," he whispered. He looked at Rex. "You were close to it, that's why they retired you. You noticed." Michael closed the box, not to bury it, but to choose when to use it. Not yet, when it counts. Rex exhaled, a long agreement. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, man and dog stood on the edge of something neither could fully name, but both understood. The fight ahead would demand everything, gaze sweeping until it found Michael. He slid into the booth across, shoulders still carrying the soldier's posture. "You picked the one place that still smells like 1982, he muttered. "That's the point," Michael said. "No cameras, no deals, just grease." Carter's eyes flicked downward. He's still with you. Rex doesn't leave my side anymore, Michael answered. Not after what we saw. The silence said more than words. Then Carter leaned in. You've been asking questions that get men buried. Michael tapped the flash drive in his pocket. Kids, experiments, names, agencies that shouldn't exist. I told you to walk away, Carter said, voice low. You think I can? No, Carter admitted, but I had to try. The waitress dropped 2 coffees without a word. Carter sipped, grimaced. Michael didn't touch his. You remember the Branford case? Michael asked. The missing twin? Carter nodded. Ava Miles, never found. It wasn't a custody fight. Abigail remembers rooms, procedures. She's 10 years old, Carter. She was part of a program. The detective swore under his breath. Michael pressed on. Phase 2 was already running back then, and we missed it. Carter hesitated, then spoke. There's a room downtown. Not in the books. Fridays, 2 p.m., men in suits. Always 27 minutes. I counted. Why not report it? You think I'd be sitting here if I had? Rex exhaled sharply, sensing the tension. Carter slid a folded napkin across the table. A name. She was one of them. Burned bridges. Vanished. If she's alive, she knows. Michael studied the name. Why help me? Carter stared at his cup. Because I used to believe the system worked, that justice barked on its own. His eyes dropped to Rex. But maybe your dog's the last one who still remembers how. He stood to leave. This doesn't end in handcuffs. It ends in silence. Watch your 6. Then the bell jingled behind him, leaving only the rain. Michael left minutes later, Rex at his side, the napkin folded in his pocket. The city was too quiet. No chatter, no engines. Just the hum of street lamps and the crunch of gravel under boots. Rex's growl, low, almost imperceptible, confirmed what Michael already felt. They were being hunted. He quickened his pace. 2 cars that had been parked earlier were gone. The laundromat's glow flickered like a pulse, too clean, too staged. Then movement, a glint from a rooftop, a shadow crossing the alley. The trap snapped shut. The first assailant lunged from behind a dumpster, mask blank, blade glinting. Rex launched faster, colliding mid-air, driving the man into the wall. Teeth, snarls, precision. Obeyed instantly, falling in at Michael's side as they sprinted into the maze of alleys. Puddles splashed, trash scattered, silence pressed down like a weight. A chain-link fence blocked the path. Rex leapt first, clearing it in one motion. Michael followed, tearing his arm on the barbed edge, blood slicking his sleeve. They landed behind a shuttered bakery, the air rank with old yeast. Shadows passed on the other side of the fence, rifles low, eyes sharp. Michael pressed against the brick, heart hammering. Rex's growl rumbled, the same one he'd given in Kandahar seconds before an ambush. They're not leaving empty-handed, Michael whispered. He spotted a fire escape. A chance. Rex darted first, Michael close behind, metal groaning under their climb. They flattened on the rooftop as beams of light swept below. From above he saw them clearly, 3 men moving like ghosts, suppressors on their weapons, no insignia, no words. One pocketed his shell casing. Not just hunters, cleaners. Michael turned to Rex, whispering, We're not chasing shadows anymore. We're running from them. Rex nudged his hand, steady as stone. They slipped across rooftops and vanished into the rain-soaked night. The envelope appeared the next morning, slipped into his precinct mail. No return address, just his name, written in a child's uneven scrawl, Detective Michael Reyes. His chest tightened. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single drawing, crayon pressed so hard the paper nearly tore. A room, sterile white walls, a table, cameras in corners, a two-way mirror, wires to a machine. Abigail had drawn it in perfect, painful detail. 4 figures stood inside. A little girl, herself. Beside her, a faceless man with square shoulders and a hawk wing patch on his chest. Next to him, Anders, his salt and pepper hair unmistakable, his smile thin and cruel. And in the corner, tall, silent, arms behind his back, no features, just a label in shaky block letters. The man from the announcements. Underneath, Hall. Michael's blood went cold. Superintendent Hale, the polished administrator who stood at press conferences preaching school safety. He wasn't a bureaucrat. He was in the room. Rex whined softly, ears pinned back, as if he felt the weight in the colors. Michael pinned the drawing at the center of his evidence board. The chaos of files and photos suddenly aligned. Phase 2 wasn't random surveillance. It was selection. Gifted kids, troubled kids, behavioral outliers. They weren't being helped. They were being harvested. His phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Abigail had a good day. Drew a picture. Said it was for you. Michael stared at the screen, throat tight. She had given
Fur, grounding him. The pieces fit now. Anders, Hale, the suits in black, the children who vanished. It wasn't a conspiracy web anymore. It was war. And the first battle had been drawn by a child who refused to be erased. They came at dawn, 3 black sedans slipping into the staff lot like secrets no one meant to tell. Fog blurred the asphalt, but the men cut clean through it. Dark coats, darker ties, shoes that didn't squeak. They moved with the economy of people who had practiced taking rooms. Inside Roosevelt High, the lights hummed a weak hymn. Michael waited at the end of the art corridor, Rex at his side. Still, until you saw the ears, pricked and forward. Room 219's window had been patched with plastic, the draft carrying that faint metallic tang Michael had learned to treat as warning. The front doors banged once. 4 sets of steps followed, steady and unhurried. The office staff's protests cut short, clipped voices, silencing them. Then the men turned the corner, and the hallway dropped a degree. The leader, gray at the temples, lifted a credential in a practiced flick. Silver seal, hologram shimmer. Expensive, maybe real, maybe worse. Special investigations. State level. We'll take custody of the recovered material. His voice carried assumption, not request. Rex leaned forward. The leash went taut, then slack, as if leather remembered its job. "Good morning," Michael said evenly. Politeness is armor. He'd read the credential twice already, catching imperfections. The embossed edge, too soft, the crest line off. If fake, it was flawless. If real, rot ran deep. The tall one angled wider, coat parting to flash the rig on his shoulder. "You recovered digital media and records. We'll need those. Now." Michael kept his eyes on the gray man. "And you are?" "Already told you. Jurisdiction is ours." "Funny," Michael said. "I've got a missing child, an assault, and a concealed sub-level off the books. Sounds like crimes for a court, not a filing cabinet." The youngest spoke softly, gaze on Rex. "Chain of custody. You hand it over, we sign. You're clean." Clean. The word soured in the air. Rex pressed against Michael's shin, steadying, then growled low. "You're early," Michael said. "We don't drink coffee," the gray man replied, eyes sweeping the taped glass and flagged evidence. You removed items. I preserved a crime scene. And now you'll preserve your career, the tall one said mildly. The drive, the files, the box. The box.
The art room twisted in the draft. You have a warrant? Michael asked. We have authority. Different shelves, the youngest sighed. Officer, don't make this hard. Rex's growl deepened, bedrock steady. Michael remembered Abigail's crayon drawing, her whisper. They said no one would ever find me. He felt the line forming, the one he would have to cross. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about headlines or heroes in uniforms, but about a dog quietly lying at our feet, reminding us that love doesn't need words. German shepherds, with their loyalty and steady hearts, show us what devotion truly looks like. They protect, they comfort, and they stay, even when the world feels uncertain. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt understood, you already know that bond is something sacred. And if you'd like to explore ways to strengthen that connection, there's a resource I found that might give you gentle guidance and inspiration. No pressure, just something you may want to look at if your heart feels the same way mine does. Because in the end, what we take with us are not things, but moments. The wag of a tail, the quiet presence on a long night, the comfort of knowing you're never truly alone. So give your dog an extra pat tonight. Hold on to that gift. And if you're curious, maybe take a look at that resource. It might help you see the love you share in a whole new light.